Oh, that's a little better. I'm Al Browne, and I've been a member of this congregation for about 40 years. And for 55 years, I have been a member of Local 288 International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And for nearly 40 years, I worked as a construction electrician. And for a few of those years, I was president of the local. And when not president of the local, I was usually on the executive board or the negotiating committee. So the reason I was asked to give this Labor Day talk is that except for my wife, I might be the only member of this congregation who's ever been a union official. By the way, I want to apologize in advance for not making much eye contact with you. But if I have to alternate between looking at you and looking at the page, I'm going to keep losing my place and we'll be here all day. IBEW local president is not a paid position. I received a small stipend to cover out-of-the-pocket costs, but I never broke even. It was a nerve-wracking job and paid nothing. So why does anyone do it? It's like teaching. You do it for the outcome, not the income. My purpose today is to explain that union organizing does not take place in a vacuum. It occurs within the legal constraints imposed by the political system in which it is forced to operate. My source material for this talk is mostly from 3 current periodicals. The August issue of Dollars and Cents, which is a publication of a socialist collective of economists. The August issue of The Electrical Worker, which is an insider newsletter published by the IBEW for its own members. None of you have ever seen a copy. And an online article in The Conversation, written by Eric Loomis, who teaches history at the University of Rhode Island and who publishes a blog called Lawyers, Guns, and Money. And one book, Which Side Are You On? By Thomas Geoghegan, Penguin Books, 1991. President Biden promised he would be the most pro-union president in history. The 3 periodicals I'll be quoting all contain articles reviewing his job performance in this regard. The article in Dollars and Cents says, Assessing Bidenomics. It argues that Mr. Biden is certainly doing the best he can, but whereas FDR had massive majorities in both houses of Congress, Biden has only a slim majority in the Senate and gets outvoted in the House. Normally, you would not expect a president in this situation to be able to do anything at all, but by cleverly using executive powers, he has done a few things. The article in The Electrical Worker has a much more optimistic view. Their lead article, Boots on the Ground, says, Biden promised to be rebuilt with union jobs, and those jobs are here. The article goes on to list statistics which prove that point. Spending on manufacturing construction went from $76 billion a year in 2021 to $234 billion a year in 2024. Average hourly wages on construction jobs have gone from about $28 an hour in 2020 to about $35 an hour today, and wage growth is outpacing inflation. An editorial by IBEW President Kenneth W. Cooper says, things can be pretty good without being perfect, but by nearly all of the numbers we use to measure success, it's better now than at any point in our adult lives. In the last 3 years, we have seen, for the first time in nearly a century, promises made to working people on the campaign trail that are actually being kept once the candidate is in the White House. And the result is what we always said it would be: record job growth for the nation and an unprecedented boom in our industries. We've had the best 3 years of job growth in history, averaging nearly 300,000 jobs per month, and unemployment is at or below 4% for nearly 30 months, the longest stretch in 50 years. And while most economists predicted that we would have a recession following the drop in inflation, we got nothing of the kind. End quote. In 2023, Biden said his administration was making it easier to empower workers by making it easier to join a union. In his article in Conversation, historian Eric Loomis says he would give Biden an A- for his record on worker rights. This is the same grade he gives FDR. Biden is the only sitting president to ever walk a picket line with striking workers. Mr. Biden feels that all of our institutions are under siege, and the only way to defend them is to bring back the middle class. And the only way to bring back the middle class is to bring back unions, because it was unions that built the American middle class. By appointing pro-labor members to the National Labor Relations Board, Biden has improved the prospects for union labor in general. He has used his executive powers to improve working conditions on federal projects in many ways. He has required the use of project labor agreements, banned non-compete clauses, expanded eligibility for overtime pay. And the wording of spending bills now requires that federal building projects must use registered apprentices. But to be a registered apprentice, you have to meet the definition used by the Bureau of Apprenticeship Training. And these requirements are pretty stringent, and only training programs sponsored by unions can usually meet them. But as much as these incremental improvements may help American workers, they are nothing compared to what could happen if we had a pro-union majority in both houses of Congress. So how often does this happen? Well, not very often. In the last 100 years, it has occurred a total of only 4 years. At this point, you're probably going to say, now, wait a minute, the Democratic Party is the liberal pro-union party, and surely they've controlled both houses for more than 4 years. But you're missing something. Only when we had an overwhelming Democratic majority in both houses did we actually have a liberal majority. This happened after the FDR landslide victories in the 30s, and again after the LBJ victory in 1964. The first victory gave us the Farm Bill, Social Security, unemployment insurance, the minimum wage, and the Wagner Act. And most of this happened in about 2 years. And the second victory gave us Medicare, Medicaid, and the Voting Rights Act of 1964. So everything done in the last 100 years to make life bearable for the working class came out of a mere 4 years of liberal control. Though we have had a few victories in the past 100 years, we have also had some disastrous defeats. In 1947, a Republican-controlled Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Law, which regulated the conduct of labor unions. It was also supposed to regulate the conduct of employers, but the provisions for doing so were weak, slow, and ineffective. And this was by design. President Harry Truman saw through this ruse, and he vetoed it, calling it a slave labor law. But the Republican Congress overrode his veto, and it became law anyway, and American workers have suffered under it ever since. It's interesting that the Republican Party always claims to be against government regulation, except when it comes to regulating workers or women's bodies. Then they make an exception. By now, there's a whole cottage industry grown up of sleazy lawyers who, for a price, will show you how to openly break the Taft-Hartley law and get away with it, and do basically whatever you want with your employees. Let me give you a real-world example. During the 1980s, one of our local union signatory contractors began doing something that was a clear violation of the contract and clearly an unfair labor practice. At the time, when most local members were out of work, he began hiring untrained people off the street and paying them whatever he could get them to work for. The contract requires signatory contractors to first hire through the union hall until they run out of workers before hiring anyone else, and then anyone who is hired be paid union wages as specified by the contract. He did neither. We first used the local grievance procedure and brought the case before a panel of 3 union members and 3 contractors. All members of the panel found in our favor, even the 3 contractors. But the contractor ignored their findings, so we took it to court. The court found in our favor, but he appealed and appealed and appealed. Finally, after 11 years and $90,000 in legal expense, we won and he had to settle. By that time, he owed us several $1,000,000, which he did not have. But he did have enough to reimburse our $90,000 legal expense, plus pay a couple $1,000s each to the local members who had been cheated out of a job. But this was never supposed to happen. I'm sure that the lawyer who represented this contractor assured him that there was no way Local 288 could ever win. We would run out of money or run out of patience, or our membership would run out of patience and replace their leaderships. Ultimately, we would lose because the system was designed that way. Actually, our business agent did lose his job over this issue, but not until the case was won. But what good does it do for a worker to have legal rights if it takes 11 years and $90,000 to assert those rights? Does the myriad of anti-union laws, especially the Taft-Hartley law, really constitute a serious impediment to organizing? Well, yes, it does, a very serious one. Before this law was passed, union membership in this country was 30% of the workforce. Today it stands at 10%. Right-wing columnists will tell you that unions are obsolete and unneeded and workers just don't want them anymore. But those same columnists have no explanation as to why membership in Canada is still at 30%. And several recent polls have indicated that at least 70% of American workers would prefer to work under a union contract if they had that option. But anti-union politicians have struggled mightily to ensure that we do not have that option. It's true that technology has eliminated union jobs in steelmaking, manufacturing, and other unions that are heavily, or other industries that are heavily unionized. But unions on both sides of the Canadian border have more than compensated by bringing union contracts to workers that no one would have tried to organize a generation ago. When I was a student at ISTC in the 50s, I was warned that one disadvantage of teaching was that I would spend my whole life in a non-union occupation. But in the 70s, teachers started organizing, and today teaching is one of the most heavily organized jobs in the country. And other public sector jobs have also gone union. My own Local 288, represents city employees in Waverly, Osage, and Evansdale. One of the most interesting white-collar groups to form an IBEW local are the Deputy Attorneys General in New Jersey, all 450 of them. The silliest reason ever given for the higher rate of union membership in Canada is that Canadians have better unions. This is ridiculous because they have the same unions. See this union newsletter I showed you earlier? Why do you suppose some of it's printed in French? Okay. It is printed in French for the benefit of the Québécois, our French-speaking locals in Canada. The same would be true for auto workers, steel makers, teamsters, etc. Union members in Canada are represented by the same unions that we are. They are organized by the same organizations, but under a radically different legal framework. And union organizing does not take place in a vacuum. If the PRO Act had been passed, everything would have changed. We would have had something called card check recognition. With card check recognition, if the union can present to the NLRB cards signed by 51% of the employees demanding to be represented by a particular union, then that union is certified as the bargaining unit. The organizing drive is over and the union won. That's how they do it in Canada, and it works fine. Legislation of this type has been proposed many times over the years, and it has always failed. This time it failed because of one man, Joe Manchin. Because it failed, we will retain the present system in which signed cards merely mark the beginning of a long process wherein a certification election is held. Its results are then challenged and another election is held, usually after a long delay. This gives the company the opportunity to intimidate workers, force them to watch anti-union propaganda films, or threaten to close the plant and move it overseas if it goes union, or simply fire workers that look to be pro-union and replace them with company stooges. Isn't this illegal? Of course it's illegal, and the NLRB finds them in violation and fines them. They just pay the fine and keep doing it. The penalties are so trivial that employees simply accept them as part of the cost of doing business. And the union eventually runs out of money and gives up. This is our present system, and were it not for Joe Manchin, we could have changed it. But instead of hating Joe Manchin, we should accept that if we had one more pro-union vote in the Senate, Joe Manchin's treachery would be irrelevant. We need that one more vote, and it might happen. If Mr. Trump alienates enough voters to lose the election as badly as Mr. Goldwater did in 1964, that would affect down-ballot races and change the composition of the legislature and usher in a whole new progressive era. Am I predicting that this will happen? No, but no one predicted it would happen in 64, but it did. And no one would predicted it would happen in the 30s, but it did. I do predict that it will eventually happen, and when it does, no one will have predicted it. In the meantime, unions serve a useful purpose, even at 10%, even for those who do not belong to them. One large union in a community helps uplift wages and working conditions for the whole community. And those who are represented are guaranteed fair wages and working conditions, and women workers are generally guaranteed a safe and respectful working environment. When the first sexual harassment suits were filed in the 60s, after women were included as a protected class in the Civil Rights Act, the plaintiffs were always women who worked in the parts of a company not covered by a union contract. Now, why do you suppose this is true? Think about it. Can you even imagine some petty supervisor patting his secretary on the butt as she walked by her desk if there were a shop steward in the same building? She'd file a grievance the same day, and the supervisor would be hauled before some panel, and if he wasn't fired immediately, he would be forced to apologize and sent away to charm school for 6 weeks. That's what we call sensitivity training, charm school. In 1979, I was the bull steward on a large project, and I was informed that the first wave of female apprentices we had just recruited would be arriving soon, and I was to prepare the troops for this event. I first walked into the print trailer where journeymen go to consult the latest print and ordered them to remove all of the pin-up pictures from the wall. These covered the whole wall from floor to ceiling on all 4 walls. I believe they bragged that the collection included every Playboy centerfold ever printed. They complained, this isn't pornography, these are legal. And I said, I think women may find them offensive. They argued that it had taken years to compile this collection and they couldn't bear to throw them away. I said, you don't have to throw them away, just take them home and put them up in your house. Have your wife tell you which walls to hang them on. The pictures came down. I said that as a general rule, treat each one of these